The iconic Chuck E. Cheese and Peter Piper Pizza and about 1/3 of its 700 locations have reopened. But it's notably the first big restaurant name to declare bankruptcy in the pandemic.
Chuck E. Cheese was once the ultimate childhood hangout, a magical blend of pizza, arcade games, and animatronic entertainment that promised endless fun and celebration. But somewhere along the way, this beloved family destination lost its spark and found itself drowning in debt. What exactly caused Stachetza Misotiretai caused such an iconic brand to fall so hard? Was it simply changing times, bad business decisions, or something more complex lurking beneath the surface? The answer might surprise you, revealing a complicated story of ambition, missteps, and a staggering financial gamble gone wrong. The debt crisis looms. Chuck E. Cheese's biggest challenge was not declining popularity or shifting consumer tastes, it was debt. Beginning in 2014, the company's total debt ballooned to more than $1 billion, nearly tripling in a short period. Although Chuck E. Cheese continued to generate positive operating income, those earnings were overwhelmed by interest payments and loan obligations. Even steady sales couldn't offset the burden. Financially, the company was operating with an anchor around its neck. This massive debt load forced Chuck E. Cheese into a precarious position. Cash flow was constantly diverted to servicing loans, leaving little room for reinvestment or error. The business no longer had the flexibility to weather downturns or unexpected disruptions. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2020 and locations were forced to close, the loss of revenue pushed an already strained company past its breaking point. What might have been a temporary disruption became an existential crisis. The debt problem didn't appear overnight. For years, the company had tried to modernize its operations and attract families through revitalization efforts. While these initiatives showed promise, they unfolded alongside rising labor costs, higher food prices, and increasing competition for family entertainment dollars. Margins slowly tightened, but these pressures alone were not fatal. The real issue was that the company's financial structure left no margin for error. Private equity ownership played a central role in this shift. In 2014, Apollo Global Management acquired Chuck E. Cheese for $950 million, bringing capital but also dramatically increasing leverage. Soon after, the company spent more than $100 million to acquire Peter Piper Pizza, further expanding its footprint while adding complexity and additional debt. These decisions increased financial pressure and made covering interest payments a constant struggle. By the late 2010s, Chuck E. Cheese was generating revenue, but losing money once debt costs were included. The company was trapped in a cycle where profits flowed to lenders instead of improvements. When the pandemic arrived, it simply exposed how fragile the business had become. The debt crisis, more than any other factor, sealed Chuck E. Cheese's path toward bankruptcy. Reflecting on the past, it is evident that Chuck E. Cheese's debt crisis was not entirely due to poor sales or mismanagement, but rather a factor to a certain extent. The core problem was the company's enormous debt obligations, which had turned into a financial chokehold, greatly reducing its ability to invest, innovate, or regain its former position. Although the operating profit was in the positive territory, it never caught up with the colossal costs associated with the debt interest. Thus, the company was losing its ground even during the years of profits. This is the reason why the bankruptcy was not just a short-term crisis issue, but rather the long-term problem of carrying the unsustainable debt. At the same time, Chuck E. Cheese's downfall is slowly revealed, and the lesson that debt might be invisible until it becomes overwhelming comes out loud and clear. For someone who is not very observant, a restaurant can appear to be very busy and stable, but in reality, financial commitments can very well undermine a company's health, making it reach the limit very slowly. With this looming debt crisis setting the stage, it helps to rewind to the origins of Chuck E. Cheese to see how the company was built and why it was so unique. Origins and Atari roots. Chuck E. Cheese's story began in an unlikely place, the video game giant Atari. Founded in 1977 by Nolan Bushnell, the same innovator behind Atari, Chuck E. Cheese was originally a division of this pioneering gaming company. Bushnell recognized the potential to combine arcade gaming with food, creating a new kind of family entertainment venue. He knew that coin-operated games generated huge returns for operators, earning many times their initial cost in quarters. His idea was to claim a larger share of that revenue by offering an environment where games and pizza coexisted. Bushnell's vision went beyond just placing arcade cabinets in restaurants. He understood that food, especially pizza, took time to prepare, creating a natural opportunity for customers to enjoy games while waiting. He also introduced animatronic characters as live entertainment, a clever and low-cost way to keep kids engaged. Interestingly, the famous Chuck E. Cheese character wasn't even supposed to be a rat. It was originally supposed to be a coyote. But when the costume came back as a rat, Bushnell leaned into the unexpected and renamed the concept Chuck E. Cheese's Pizza Time Theater. This quirky twist became the brand's charm. Despite its strong start, Atari's ownership complicated matters. Bushnell had sold Atari to Warner Communications, and while he created Chuck E. Cheese, he didn't own it outright. Warner wasn't excited about running a family arcade restaurant chain and was willing to sell the division back to Bushnell for $500,000, paid over 5 years. This move allowed Bushnell to focus fully on growing Chuck E. Cheese independently. The first location was an instant hit, with families flocking to experience the new style of entertainment that mixed food, games, and shows. The early achievements resulted in fast enlargement. Bushnell immediately set up a second outlet, and more were anticipated soon after. The chances of franchises drew in the investors who were very eager to take advantage of the brand's popularity. One important franchise deal was with Brock, who had a great number of Chuck E. Cheese outlets. But soon enough, there were conflicts when Brock tried to leave the contract to create his own rival chain, Showbiz Pizza. This led to lawsuits but also competition between the two brands that lasted through the 1980s. The initial stages of Chuck E. Cheese are perfect examples of how innovation and daring ideas can simultaneously take a brand to rapid fame. On the contrary, they also point out the challenges, such as differing interests and the strain of growing. The link with Atari not only gives Chuck E. Cheese a peculiar character as a restaurant, but also as a technology, entertainment, and dining experiment. That too, a very early one. Moreover, with great success again, the company had already prepared the ground for problems to be predominant in the coming decades. One has to grasp this basis, pairing entertainment technology roots with the ambition of quick growth, to understand how the company's future troubles were already deeply rooted in its past. For one thing, quality management and proper location strategy are critical when firms grow at a fast pace, which is a tough lesson that Chuck E. Cheese had to take. The events of the 1980s would undoubtedly indicate just how fragile the early success could turn out to be. Just as fast growth created excitement, it also brought new problems as Chuck E. Cheese expanded aggressively, often without the belt-tightening needed when times changed. Rapid expansion and growing pains. In the early 1980s, Chuck E. Cheese was growing so fast it was nearly impossible to keep up. The brand's popularity had exploded, and Nolan Bushnell was eager to open multiple locations in quick succession. The novelty of a new Chuck E. Cheese in town meant crowds flooded in for months after each opening. But these initial bursts of sales couldn't last forever. Many of the new locations were opened based on optimistic projections rather than solid market research. This rushed expansion meant some restaurants ended up in less than ideal neighborhoods, cutting into long-term profitability. At the same time, Bushnell's rival Robert Brock was doing much the same with his Showbiz Pizza chain. Both companies fueled their rapid growth by taking on significant debt and even going public to raise more capital. It became a race for dominance in the family entertainment dining market. Unfortunately, this competition pushed both deeper into debt, with the hope that bigger was better. But bigger also brought bigger risks, especially with many locations not living up to sales expectations. Adding to the challenge was the video game industry crash of 1983, which dramatically reduced the popularity of arcade-style entertainment. This collapse hit Chuck E. Cheese hard because gaming was the brand's core attraction. With fewer visitors spending quarters on arcade games, revenue streams dried up even as overhead costs remained high. The combination of saturated markets, questionable site selection, and crashing game interest created a perfect storm that the company was ill-prepared to weather. The financial consequences were severe. The heavy debt load accumulated from expansion created fixed costs that Chuck E. Cheese couldn't cover with declining sales. This imbalance led the company to file for bankruptcy, marking the end of the original chain. Meanwhile, Showbiz Pizza was able to survive this collapse by refinancing and selling off a portion of the company. In a twist, Showbiz even acquired Chuck E. Cheese's assets through bankruptcy, becoming the dominant player with nearly 250 locations combined. This period of rapid and reckless growth offers a cautionary tale about the dangers of overexpansion without solid foundations. For Chuck E. Cheese, it meant trading initial excitement for chronic financial strain. Yet the story didn't end there. The merging of rival brands and continued attempts to find a sustainable model showed the company's resilience even as it struggled to regain its footing. The challenges of this era would shape Chuck E. Cheese for years to come, influencing brand identity, operational strategy, and ownership changes that echoed well into the new millennium. Brand battles and consolidation. After the original Chuck E. Cheese chain filed for bankruptcy in the mid-1980s, the competitive landscape shifted. Its rival, Showbiz Pizza, run by Robert Brock, survived the downturn and went on to acquire Chuck E. Cheese's assets. In a surprising reversal, the imitator became the owner of the original brand, bringing nearly 250 locations under one company. During the late 1980s, both brands continued operating separately despite shared ownership. Each had a distinct identity. Showbiz Pizza featured the Rock-a-Fire Explosion animatronic band, while Chuck E. Cheese focused on birthday parties, pizza, and its iconic mouse mascot. While this dual-brand approach appealed to different audiences, it also created inefficiencies, increasing costs and complicating operations. By the early 1990s, leadership concluded that maintaining two similar brands was unsustainable. The company chose to consolidate under the stronger Chuck E. Cheese name, gradually converting all Showbiz Pizza locations. Although the restaurants were rebranded, the parent company retained the Showbiz Pizza name for several years before fully transitioning. This consolidation streamlined operations, reduced costs, and created a consistent customer experience, allowing the company to focus on refining its core formula of food, games, and family entertainment. The company made the final step of its transformation in 1998 by officially changing its name to CEC Entertainment. The action completely abolished the Showbiz Pizza name and opened a new chapter in the company's story. The CEC Entertainment brand was now a powerful and recognizable one, with hundreds of Chuck E. Cheese locations under its supervision nationwide, and it had already taken the family dining entertainment space by storm. The rivalry that was once between the two chains went down in history as they were replaced by one national icon. On the other hand, unification did not get rid of all the challenges. The company's rapid expansion and earlier financial difficulties were still the main reasons why it couldn't move on. The changing entertainment landscape kept calling for an innovative and very diligent company. Chuck E. Cheese had to change its ways without losing its charm to the parents and the kids. New competitors, changing consumer habits, and family outing expectations all came together to make Chuck E. Cheese adjust its ways without becoming less appealing to those who want nostalgia. The company's operational expenses were still high. Big venues needed a lot of personnel, arcades and animatronics had to be maintained constantly, and food service operations had to be maintained at all times. It was becoming more and more challenging to create enough traffic to cover these costs as kids' entertainment options were expanding from just going out to being digital and at home. The company had to deal with the constant balancing act of making their business larger and more environmentally friendly at the same time. The merging of Showbiz Pizza and Chuck E. Cheese set the stage for future revival efforts, but it also pointed out the need for diligent management and flexibility. The brand was strengthened through unification, but whether it would be able to last would depend on its being in tune with the times and not repeating the financial mistakes that had already made its survival a close call. Even when a brand is iconic, survival depends on how well it can respond to the changing demands of its customers and the market environment around it. Attempts at revival. By the 2010s, Chuck E. Cheese was struggling to bring families back to its restaurants. While the brand remained popular with children, parents increasingly viewed the experience as loud, outdated, and chaotic. Recognizing that parents ultimately control spending decisions, the company launched a revitalization strategy aimed at modernizing its image and making locations more appealing to the entire family. One major change was the redesign of many restaurants to feel cleaner, quieter, and more welcoming. Menus were updated to include options more attractive to adults, and technology upgrades became a central focus. The most significant shift was the introduction of the Play Pass system, which replaced traditional arcade tokens with digital cards that stored points electronically. This streamlined gameplay, reduced friction for customers, and modernized the in-store experience. Free Wi-Fi was also introduced at many locations, reflecting changing customer expectations. In total, more than 80 of the company's 600-plus locations were remodeled during this push. Despite these efforts, Chuck E. Cheese continued to struggle with inconsistent traffic. Family entertainment habits were changing rapidly, and the company's traditional arcade-based model faced competition from smartphones, home gaming systems, and on-demand digital entertainment. Families no longer needed to leave home for interactive experiences, forcing Chuck E. Cheese to compete not just with restaurants, but with an expanding universe of digital alternatives. At the same time, operating costs steadily increased. Rising minimum wage laws pushed labor expenses higher, while food and ingredient prices fluctuated. Larger, more complex venues required additional staff, further tightening margins. Individually, these costs were manageable, but together they began to erode profitability, especially as revenues remained uneven across locations. Importantly, Chuck E. Cheese's core operations remained profitable for much of this period. However, those profits were shrinking year after year. The company was earning less from its day-to-day business, and heavy debt from prior financial decisions drained cash before it could be reinvested into meaningful improvements. Then came the COVID-19 pandemic. Mandatory closures and a sudden loss of foot traffic cut off revenue for months, pushing an already strained business toward collapse. The pandemic exposed how fragile the company's financial structure had become. While modernization efforts showed promise, they were not enough to overcome deeper financial and structural challenges. Chuck E. Cheese's revival attempts highlight the difficulty of updating a nostalgic brand in a rapidly changing market. Technology upgrades and redesigns helped, but lasting survival required a more sustainable financial and operational foundation. Even with the best intentions and some positive changes, Chuck E. Cheese was navigating treacherous waters with tough currents pulling it off course.
The private equity fallout. The turning point that pushed Chuck E. Cheese toward crisis came in 2014 when it was acquired by private equity firm Apollo Global Management for $950 million. While private equity ownership can provide capital and strategic direction, it often relies on heavy borrowing. In this case, Chuck E. Cheese's debt nearly tripled, surpassing $1 billion and placing intense strain on the company's finances. Soon after the acquisition, Chuck E. Cheese spent $113 million to buy Peter Piper Pizza, expanding its footprint, but adding even more financial pressure. With so much debt on its balance sheet, the company was forced to prioritize interest payments over reinvesting in stores, technology, or customer experience. Even as consumer tastes shifted and competition increased, cash flow was largely tied up servicing loans. Chuck E. Cheese managed to stay in the black in terms of operating income for quite a number of years, but still, this did not help alleviate the strain of its debts. Operating income does not take into consideration interest payments, and when these were included, the company was only able to report profits in 1 out of the 6 years after its acquisition, so they were not able to make any significant cuts in their debts as they were stuck in the same cycle. In the meantime, the increase in costs, like higher salaries and food costs, reduced profit margins. Changing customer preferences and growing competition further affected revenue growth negatively, and the company found itself caught in a perfect storm of rising costs, no income, and high leverage. When the pandemic struck in 2020, Chuck E. Cheese was already in a weak position. The shutting down of stores and the decline in customer numbers led to a rapid loss of cash, which consequently made the company's debt obligations unmanageable. Thus, the company had to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which allowed it not only to restructure, but also to close some of its outlets that were not doing well.
Chuck E. Cheese's demise is finger-pointing at the hazards of debt-laden and financially engineered corporate careers. Although restructuring might save the brand, its narrative reveals that even those icons that are loved most are not spared the repercussions of hard market conditions that come with the overuse of leverage and poor timing. Chuck E. Cheese's story shows how even iconic brands can struggle under the weight of financial missteps and shifting markets. Its journey from pioneering family entertainment to bankruptcy is a powerful lesson in managing growth and debt wisely. If you found this breakdown valuable, tap like and subscribe for more deep dives into the business stories shaping the world around us. And before you go, stick around and check out the next video on your screen. It continues the conversation in a whole new way. Thanks for watching.